All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. We have two guests with us who I'll get to here in a minute. But before that, I want to welcome all our viewers. Thank you for joining us on this day. We just watched Mr. Soul, and we're going to have a panel discussion with Dr. Akehinmi and Mr. Mark Burnett, both from Tennessee Tech. But I guess Mark Burnett is no longer, we can say, Tennessee Tech. But I mean, I think he is a lifer, Tennessee Tech. So
Yeah.
um, I think most people watching know you, but I do want to introduce you first. And then, in fact, I would like you to tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll start with Dr. Krystal.
Hi, I'm Krystal Akehinmi, originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I joined Tennessee Tech University in the fall of 2018 after commuting for an entire academic year from West Virginia. And I'm glad to be with you this evening and to talk about this important show related to my own work, which is in African American history.
Well, before we move on, though, you tell us a little bit. I know you got your undergrad in Florida A&M, correct? And then you have some other degrees. Please tell us about those other degrees as well.
Okay, we're going to talk about important institutions. I graduated from West Charlotte Senior High School.
Oh,
Woohoo! And I'm giving that shout out because it's really actually related to some of the comments I think we can share in regards to the documentary. But I did attend Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida, for my undergraduate degree in history education, and then I did my master's work with one of the people featured in the film, actually, Bernice Johnson Regan at American University, and I did my doctoral studies at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. So I was ready for the cold that we experienced that shut down school for an entire week this week.
the rest of us were not ready for that. Well, I'll
That's
speak for
right.
myself. I was not ready for that. As you know, my background being from Ghana, where it's warm all the time. So,
Mhm.
so I wasn't ready for that. But thank you so much for joining us, and we'll get into it here in a minute because we don't have a lot of time. Even though we need a whole lot of time to talk about the topic. We'll
Right.
shift to Mr. Mark. Please tell us about yourself, and please don't forget to mention the painting that I see behind you and the things you do in that
There's one
area
there
as well.
too. You're talking about this one over here. That's right.
Yes.
I'm Mark Burnett. I was the vice president for student affairs at Tennessee Tech up until a little over a year ago, and I retired after 36 years working at the university. I'm originally from Alcoa, Tennessee, so I'm Tennessee born and raised. Came to Tennessee Tech University in 1977 as a student athlete. I have degrees in English journalism, master's in educational psychology, an EDS degree in higher ed administration. So my whole life has been purple and gold after I left Alcoa, Tennessee. But I'm glad to be with you. Cephas, congratulations on being Dr. Cephas.
Well, thank you
Very
so
proud of
much.
you, and
Thank you.
Dr. Krystal, it's always good to see you.
You too, sir.
Thank you so much.
The painting behind me is called Hope for Tomorrow.
Well,
Two African American students, one looking out a window, and I've been doing a series of paintings of young people, not just African American, but young people, and some of them, and calling them Hope for Tomorrow because they are.
you know, I may have to do a show with you just on that because on some of your paintings, now that you're a little freed up, and I know how it is not being freed up to paint, but now
That's
that you're a
right.
little freed up,
That's right.
we
Painting's
might need to
kinda
get
hard,
together. Yeah, we may need to
We-
then do some paintings together or something.
I would love to do that sometime.
Thank you. Well, let's jump right in. Well, before we jump in, right, I do want to say thank you to everybody that's coming again for WCTE hosting this and for joining us. First and foremost, of all the artists that were shown on that, please tell us your favorite.
Oh, come on. How you
Top
gonna ask such
favorite.
a
Oh, that's
pass?
our song. Or two top favorites.
Okay, I want to shout out my parents who just had their 50th wedding anniversary, and they actually, I don't think the Stylistics were on there. I was going to say You Make Me Feel Brand New, the Stylistics, but I thought about them because of the Spinners and Rubber Band Man.
That's
So
right.
I'm going to say the
Right.
Spinners.
All right. What about you, sir?
Well, I grew up in the household hearing Al Green all the time. So Al Green, when he started singing the song, I knew every word.
Yeah,
Yeah,
me
that's
too.
that is one of my favorite. But I have to say, when Stevie Wonder came on with Superstition, I'm like, oh, I really can listen to that all day. So anyway, but yeah, let's jump right in. Well, first, I want to get your take on the documentary, and maybe just reflect on it, and just maybe how important the show itself was, the Mr. Soul show. Miss Krystal, Dr. Krystal, we'll start with you.
I thought it was very well done. Just for the documentary, generally the imagery with the commentary blended really well, and because you can see some documentaries, especially done by a person who's close to the subject, that aren't necessarily really awesome. So I thought it was quite well done, and they hit a lot of points in a short amount of time. So I was overall pleased. What
about you, Mark?
Yeah, I thought it was really well done. Also, in fact, I got a little teary-eyed at one point, because there were so many things that, when you grow up in the middle of all of that, being a child of the 60s and coming up through all of those things, a lot of things cross your mind in watching that, in different scenes and scenarios, not just the music, but seeing the poets. I met Nikki Giovanni here at Tennessee Tech in the late 70s. And it was just hearing her and her strength and everything that she said. I mean, she was just powerful. And of course she still is, but she was powerful. She was so powerful that, you just stood in awe. I almost didn't approach her, but I had to go and talk to her. And it was very interesting talking to her in the late 70s.
So, that kind of really segues into one of the questions that I have. How important is poetry and these type of, like you was just saying, performances, and the how you phrased it, the powerful, and the impact it has on, first of all, everybody, but specifically on African Americans?
It was the spirit of the person, as they, their emphasis, the strength that they show. I'm looking at her and thinking, okay, here's this, being a bigger guy, I said, here's this relatively small African American woman who has such power. I mean, she was like the elephant in the room kind of a feeling. She was the power, and when she spoke, everything was so evident, and it was like, for all of the things that as a people that we've been through and we've come through. Also listening to James Baldwin, saying we've been through a lot, and so there's a strength that has come with going through a lot, and having been through a lot, there's a strength on the backside of that. And that's what I felt when the first time I met her. I thought, here's somebody who's been through something, and is conveying it to us that it can be our strength also. That was the feeling I had through her poetry, and through in fact, I had one of her earlier books, and she was just phenomenal. I had never met anyone quite like her at that time.
Right.
She was phenomenal. And to be at Tennessee Tech, which again, a predominantly white institution, and where I've spent most of my time. So for her to come in, and I was thankful that the university brought someone in like her.
Right.
It was empowering. It was empowering, really.
Dr. Krystal, could you add some to that?
Yes, thinking about the heritage of African Americans, and I'm talking about the people who come to the United States, or the territory that became the United States, via the Atlantic slave trade. That's my primary collective for describing African American. And of course, who African Americans are gets compounded by West African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants, who also make it to the same shores and blend in and create their own niches within African American culture. So thinking about that heritage out of the Atlantic slave trade in West Africa, where most of those cultures were oral cultures, is really significant, knowing that there's a tradition, an oral tradition that carries through to what becomes African America. And you had people who told the whole histories of nations or with their families through speaking, right? So through a variety of oral traditions, including poetry. And you also have songs. And when you look at, you speed up, and I'm thinking about, I teach African American history, and you can spend an entire class just talking about this. So I'm aiming to answer that pretty concisely, but let me give you an example from the antebellum slave period. One of my mentors, who I said was in that documentary, a clip of her singing there, is Bernice Johnson Regan, and she is one of the founders of Sweet Honey in the Rock, an a cappella all-female group, and also one of the original freedom singers for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And you can look at a famous a famous discussion that she gave actually with Bill Moyers, and it aired on PBS, and it was called "The Songs Were Free." And she was talking about how enslaved people put meaning into the sacred music that they created, what you might hear called Negro spirituals. So she speaks in that talk about how African Americans use the cultural space of all these oral expressions to actually build a people and to encourage themselves. So there's a lot of weight in terms of defining who African Americans have been, and using that space to endure and to persist despite dehumanizing treatment that goes into oral cultures and oral traditions among African Americans.
Yeah, very, very insightful. Mr. Mark, piggyback up on that as well. I know, even if you talk about oral traditions, I mean, we can go into different categories and different versions of that. We've talked about poetry. Now, what about say music and say the church, or just say, we can even make it broader, say religion, but the church specifically, the role of that, because even with this being a secular show, we saw a lot of what we would call church music that was sang there.
Yeah, well, in watching again, the other night I watched the show on the Black church and the history thereof in the United States, etc. I grew up in a family where, you could, I'll just say it this way, you could stay out all night Saturday night if you wanted to, but you'd go to church Sunday morning in that suit you stayed out all night Saturday night in. So everyone went to church, and just the spiritual. The feeling when you're there. I lived with my grandparents for a good number of years, and my grandfather was from Georgia, had been a sharecropper. He worked at Alco Aluminum in what they call the pot room, pouring molten aluminum and all of that. And he was a deacon in the Baptist church. So my grandmother was an Eastern Star and all that. So there was this spiritual culture in our home, in our house. And I'm telling you, even today, I can still see those the old deacons. Doing what some cultures call Mr. Watson, doing the chanting and the calls, which I think, relate back to, as Dr. Krystal was saying, relate back to Africa and some of the things that were brought forward over time, vocally, that were passed along, traditions that were passed along. And so, you still see it today in African-American church, or I'll say from my brain point, the Black church. Generally, the music is the thing that can set a church off, an African American church off in the first 5 minutes. Is watching the particularly our elders, watching the elderly people, because day after day they've been through something. And what I'm learning is, as I get older, the more I go through, the more these things mean to me. The more it comes out of me what God has done, how He's been ever present, how He's helped me through ups and downs in my life, and realizing that my grandparents were trying to convey to us that these things are going to happen, that life is going to be ups and downs, there are going to be challenges, there are going to be changes, particularly for me as an African American or as a Black man, and the Black culture still today in America still has its ups and downs. And so the church is pivotal. I mean, there were two people that were giants in the neighborhood generally where I grew up, and that was the pastor was a giant in our neighborhood, and then whatever star athlete was in the neighborhood generally was a giant. And of course, teachers. I grew up. My early childhood was in Black schools before there was integration. I went to my elementary school was all Black, and so all of the teachers, most of them graduated from Tennessee State University, and they were just strong in that you have to have an education. You're going to make it in this world. You got to have an education. So from those teachers to my grandparents to the pastors, etc. I mean, the community was tight. I mean, it was to me then was tighter than it is today. Even if things are much more cliquish today, but a whole neighborhood, that thing about a village, I think it carried over up until the point of integration. Anyway, it had to carry on, right? Because that was the glue. Everybody in my little community, 13 blocks. African American in Alcoa, back when I was growing up, the Hall community, everybody knew everybody. So if you got in trouble we're on block 10, it was everybody took care of
Oh, he's
It's
frozen?
frozen.
Yeah. Can you hear us? Well, while he's frozen, hopefully we'll get him back. But I'll come back to you, Dr. Krystal. Talk about as he was talking about with the importance of the church. Has that changed some, or how has that evolved historically till now? What is the place of the church in Black culture? I mean, we do have a show now actually that's going on, the Black Church, that airs here at 8:00 again on WCTE, and the first episode aired on Tuesday. Could you add a little bit more to that while we try to get Mr. Mark back? Oh, there
I'm back.
I can share a good history term right here, because what Mr. Burnett describes is something that historians have observed consistently across African American history. And Earl Lewis wrote a book called In Their Own Interest about Black Norfolk, Virginia. And he shares a term there and really kind of coins the usage of this word in a fashion that I use in all my classes to really help students understand how we might think about Jim Crow. So when you think about the period of segregation in the United States, racial apartheid in the US, students often are first able to imagine Black water fountains and white water fountains, right? The colored bathroom, the white only bathroom. And they have a sense of segregation meaning separation. But I also try to help them think about segregation, not just meaning separation, but also meaning subordination, that the effort there is to enforce a second-class citizenship on African Americans. And also, I help them to think about segregation, not just meaning separation or keeping the races apart as a place where we need to focus for understanding the time period. I also try to get them to think about Earl Lewis's term, and that is the word congregation. Now, you may be used to the word congregation and thinking about a church congregation, but he employs it, encouraging us to think about people turning inward to strengthen individuals and institutions. And so that's really a good blanket term for what Mr. Burnett was describing there, talking about what the church was, what the schools were, what the people were in his community. They were protecting one another, building one another up. And it is not to say white people don't matter or people outside this community are not valuable, but rather in this world of Jim Crow, we have it such that people are surrounded by a very violent climate. Right. So this is a matter of protection. So we may not have the violence, and we don't have the violence to the same degree today, but we definitely still have these spaces of a congregation. Maybe you've heard of the book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And I always say, why are the white kids sitting together? You just sit with whoever you want to. But a part of it is this tradition of feeling safest and that being passed down to children. So we might not have the same level of danger. And let me not say might. I insist on saying we don't have the same level of danger, because we sitting here at WCTE having this panel are a reflection of the fact that we don't have the same violent climate that we did, even though we still have racial animosity and real challenges. Right. So the answer to your question, I think, is to think about the church as a space of congregation, and to note that it was the first one that wasn't heavily policed. So the Black church was in a free space for Black expression, where people were able to be honored as leaders and be able to be cultivated as speakers, as managers, as accountants, as whoever they might become, even if they were not allowed to be that outside of that space or outside of Black communities. So even if you weren't planning on walking with the Lord all your days, you can learn how to sing in church. Right. Take that wherever else. Right. So you do have people like Mahalia Jackson, one of my favorite artists of all time, who refused to sing secular music and said, I had to use these gifts for God. And, you know, some of us had the space where you might be out and then go to church, and that was not good, like frowned upon. But definitely what Mr. Burnett describes exists, right? And there's always this kind of tension, like, can you sing for the Lord and sing for the world? And there are plenty of artists who would say, I may be singing secular or not exclusively gospel music, but that doesn't mean that my heart isn't belonging to God. And then others who will say, all your gifts ought to be used for advancing the kingdom and that alone. So that tension is current, right, and old.
Yes.
Right. You know, and as you're talking about the tension and things not being accepted, Mark Burnett, you did mention about those pillars. I think you said the pastor, the teacher, and the athlete. Some of the people that watch may not know, but you've been all of those here in this community, right?
Yes.
You're currently a pastor now, and you were an educator at Tennessee Tech for decades, and you were also an athlete at Tennessee Tech.
Yes.
So could you reflect on how important those pillars, or how important those, we want to call them leaders or role models, are to the Black community?
I still think they're very important. I'm quick to tell students when I'm talking to them, when you see athletes because of the media, you see so many more athletes on TV and they make these multi-million dollar contracts and all these things, and I'm really quick to tell students, you could quicker become a brain surgeon than you can make the NBA or the NFL. Or
right.
So your education is first. I said I used my athleticism to pay for an education. I mean, my parents could not pay for my education, and I was told early on, well, that is an avenue to get your education paid for, and your education is first. And then on top of that, I was also told, put God first. Now, when you're growing up as a child and you're hearing that and you're watching your grandparents and you're seeing those things, that doesn't take necessarily the first time they say it. It takes a little while
right.
to get to where, okay, everything that I've done, I owe to the Lord. I owe to God. I don't, He allowed me to do these things. He empowered me. He gave me the strength. That comes a little bit later, actually, in reality. You just don't realize that. You think you're doing it and you're doing these things, but it was important to know that was there, and it was important to know that my folks emphasizing education, and very few of them actually had one.
Yeah,
but it was important, and I was told all the time. I was told things like, "You are bright enough to get out," and I didn't understand that at first, because I didn't necessarily want out. I just wanted to have a better life.
Right.
And then I went to college, and it's like, you can do this. I wasn't sure at first, and it was like, you can do this. And I would call my mom, and they'd pray for you and stuff, and say,
right.
Lord, keep him there. Whatever he's going through is going to be better for him in the end. Keep him there. And so I use that stuff still today, and I like talking to young people, and I say, if you have the ability to use your noggin, to use your brain, and you have athletic ability and all, then you're blessed. So go do that. And remember, the end game is relative to education, and all of us being educators is get your education. Don't play basketball or football or whatever all your life, and then at the end of it have those years, but don't have the reward of an education. That's what I talk about more than anything else. And I tell students today also too, I said, I don't know whether you're religious or you're spiritual or what you are. I said, but if you have been brought up in it and you've gotten away from it, like most of us do in our college days, we kind of ramble and roam. I said, but if you're being blessed in any way, you're moving forward, making progress, I said, put a little God in it. That's what I say. I said, I'm not going to lecture you. I'm not going to preach to you. That's not what, but I always say, put a little God in it.
Yes. Go ahead, Dr. Krystal. I think you wanted to add something.
Yes, because he hit on some things that made me think about the documentary, and that is the power of imagery, right? Which is a big reason why the documentary was so important, because what the producer was able to do was to place a lot of imagery in front of people who had not seen Black people in this kind of complexity. Yes. And I think when Mr. Burnett speaks about these kind of three iconic figures in his community, he's speaking to the power of them being visible, right? So when I start my African American history classes, I always ask students, what's the percentage of Black people in the U.S.? And I get some amazing stats, 25, wow. 52, 36. And it's always really fun to see what they say, because in their minds, they see a lot more Black people than there are actually. And I often tell them that Colombia, South America has a double percentage of Black people compared to the US. So they have 26% Black population, and we have a 13%. And lots of times students are really surprised. And I tell them, if you look at the United States, we have a small percentage, just a few of us in the room, but we're kind of loud and visible, and you can really see us, and we got big hair or something. But I think it's important because also when I'm teaching, I'll have them do exercises like name for me 10 films that are not comedies where there is a married father with children and a good job that feature African American men. And they have a hard time coming up with that. That's not an automatic thing for them. Or if I say something like, oh, you know how all those white people always robbing banks, like they giggle whenever I use stereotypes that they are readily able to apply to Black people. And I think it has a lot to do with how much exposure they might have to the complexity of African American life. And a refrain I use in every class, no matter what the subject, is to allow people to be people in every time, in every context, and in every location. So whatever kind of complexity you would give to white Americans who you may be more familiar with, give that to African Americans, give that to Asian Americans, give that to any population of people. And I think that's a part of why the documentary was important, because it tried to show some complexity to African American life, that people are not just the images of the thug or the rioter or whatever you might see on TV. And I know I still face that as an educator today, trying to help students think about the breadth of African American experience and to just kind of rest with how there can be more people than those to which you've been exposed in your limited avenues.
Right.
You are hitting on some things that we could probably go a little deeper if we wanted to, but we're gonna keep it short. Sure, but I just thinking about being a stats guy, I hear all kinds of stuff about either African American or just anybody in general that are contrary to what the true numbers or what the true what the truth is. And one of them is, you're talking about imagery. I'm thinking, I hear all the time being poor being related to, associated with Black. Yeah. But there are more poor white people in America than there are poor Black people. But the face of poverty in America is a Black face. So really, I'm gonna put you here, Mr. Mark, here to answer a very difficult question, maybe. Okay. So do whatever you can. In societies like this, in Cookeville and at Tennessee Tech, most of the time you're one of even fewer than 30%, Black.
Oh yeah.
So there's sometimes, you can answer this however way you choose to. Is there a burden to be that Black guy? Is there a burden to be that Black woman? And I'll just leave it at that, because I can add more questions to that. And you just start off and we can expound it. And is that burden, how do you handle that burden? Because you've been seasoned it. You've been in this region for decades. And for the most part, you are that Black guy.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. When you're kind of put out front, one, being a former athlete, you're kind of, I would say, on stage, if you will, anyway. So I've spent 50 plus years being an athlete of some kind. So you're kind of out front a little bit. But, the thing that happens is you get an opportunity. I was always told by my folks, if you get an opportunity, take it. Don't, wade right into it, no matter how difficult, no matter if it makes you sweat or cry or whatever it is. You get an opportunity to better yourself and to pull other people with you, then you should do that. Now, coming to Tennessee Tech and coming to Cookeville, I only came roughly 2 hours. So my hometown is not much different, except my hometown had a larger Black community, and schools had been integrated. And so once integration occurred and you learn some different things, and people are people and blah, blah, blah. So I came to Tennessee Tech without any preconceived notions at all. I certainly didn't come thinking I'd be a failure. So there were situations you're sitting in a classroom all day and you're the only one that looks like you. What do you do with that? I learned to turn the page and say, okay, as long as they don't treat me different, I'm cool. I can be the only one in the room. In fact, most of the time, even as an administrator, I may be the only administrator in the room. So for years. And so I think a part of what happens is you may not be 100% comfortable, but you get accustomed to, okay, I'm not going to expect a room full of people that look like me.
Right.
But yet I've got to do this thing. There are very few places in the world where I would expect a room full of people who look like me. Does that add to the challenge of being successful? Yeah. And I tell students, But that could be anywhere. It can be in the boardroom, that can be in the classroom, that could be
Right.
anywhere that we go. And so you accept that challenge, and you just go. I saw it as a challenge. I didn't, I was always told, as long as I was respectable to people, as long as I treated people the way I wanted to be treated, with respect and dignity, that most of them would respond in kind. And then the ones that don't, that's not my problem. And so I know there was challenges when I walked in a room. Sometimes, like, okay, there's black guys in here, and it would be funny sometimes when it's like you're the one in charge, and you go in, and there's sometimes somebody who's looking at you. Let me give you a really good example that it's sort of related, but not. It was one of the first time, Dr. Krystal, forgive me, but for talking.
Oh, it's okay. I can relate.
But anyway, I was at a meeting in Washington, D.C. some years ago. I had taken a group of student government students with me and their advisor and all of this, in a meeting of student government advisors, et cetera, and students. Had SGA with me. Was at Washington, D.C. We were going to Arlington National Cemetery one morning. This is part of the tour. We're getting on the bus, and the person who was literally over the whole conference, I'm standing by the door of the bus, and he says, "Are you the bus driver?" And he was a little indignant, and I was a little indignant too, because my answer was no. No, sir, I'm not the bus driver. I'm part of the conference, and I'm blah blah blah. I'm on this program and doing this part of it, and yada yada yada. And the students who were with me, I looked around, and their eyes I thought they were going to faint. One, they had never seen my posture like that, and I sort of apologized later. Some of them are working at Tennessee Tech right now, actually. And so you have to realize that sometimes, you walk in the room as confident as you want to be, and there's somebody there who does not see you like you see you.
Right.
And that can be very interesting sometimes. I've had those things occur, but I realize, the strength is in you. If you're educated, you've gotten your education, you've paid attention, you've turned all the knobs and done all the right things, there's still somebody out there you're going to feel less, or you're not going to feel less. They're going to treat you less in some ways. Those things still occur today. Still occurs today. My thing here was I just got to walk through that. I was always told to walk through it. Racism, I was told by another great Tennessee Tech administrator, don't walk away from it. You walk into it. Mm-hmm. And so every problem that has come, I saw there was a solution. And my thing for younger people, to you guys even, is, you're established. People know who you are. You've made your way. You've made your bones, so to speak. And now you just got to make the walk. You just got to make the walk, realizing some days the concrete's going to be cracked in the sidewalk, and you might trip a little, but you keep walking. You're an example. Now you're an example for me.
Well, thank you. You're such a pillar in our community to all races. That we really appreciate the work that you've done at Tennessee Tech and in Cookeville, Tennessee. You truly are a gem.
Hey, Cephas, can I add one more
thing to that?
Please
do.
I know we're having this discussion, and it's about the film and about African Americans, et cetera, and culture. But I tell people all the time. I say this. If my serving people, if my helping people, if my moving forward had depended on me only helping people who look like me, I wouldn't have moved very much. It's about helping people, period. Right. No matter who they are, no matter what they look like, if they're striving to succeed, to be a success, then my obligation is to help them. Doesn't matter what they look like, where they come from, whether their parents are, Confederate flag wavers or what. It doesn't matter. If this young person wants help, I didn't care. My job and my responsibility was to help them move forward, to be better people, no matter what, no matter who they were.
And I think that's your reputation in our community. I came to Tech in 2001 for my undergrad, and I just can't seem to leave. So I know that's your reputation. Thank you so much, Dr. Krystal. Please jump in here and before I ask another question.
Okay. I think my response to that question would really depend on the audience, right? So if I'm speaking to a person who says, I want to know what I might do if my colleague is the only Black person in the space, blah, 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 right? That answer might be a different answer than the one I would give to my students who are, if they find themselves in that kind of position. So I'll start with what I would say with that, or maybe just share what I would say to that person. And that is something that I got from Terrence Roberts, who is a person who was a part of the Little Rock Nine. And this is the group of students who desegregated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. I got to see him at the institution where I was working before I came to Tennessee Tech. And he was answering a question of a student in the audience who asked something similar, like, what do? I see all this stuff. And he said, what we learned is that the obstacles that you are aware of are obstacles that you're aware of. And now that you are aware, you need to figure out how to navigate, because that doesn't actually change what you still have to do. So you still have to get around those things. So how you decide to do that is where you would put your energy. So that's where we focus, because those people who had whatever to say about us, who couldn't recognize our value, they actually didn't have much to say to us. So we had to keep going. Now, there's a different conversation about policies and how you can help to make sure that your department and your institution are doing what they can do to remove such obstacles and not to put the people who want to be impediments in the way. But what I'm going to tell that individual is that you focus on what you have to do.
Right.
And don't give your energies to being harassed by somebody else, because that's a part of the legacy of the movement, people that I've had the opportunity to interview, and I've been able to speak to a lot of them. And that is always an encouragement to me. And then when I lived in West Virginia, which is a community in it's an Appalachian state, right? And I encountered people who thought that the proper term for their first African-American professor was colored. People who were not aware of Black people with any really extensive experience. And my effort was really, as an educator, to say, let me teach you, because that was my job, right? I couldn't really be busy being flabbergasted about their ignorance. I'm there to teach them. That's why they're in my class, right? So I think we all have different roles in experiencing that. That may not be what my friend does as a banker or in some other kind of field, but as an educator, I get that opportunity. And I really enjoyed educating my very ignorant students who really enjoyed taking the classes and learning and saying, wow, I didn't know that. And really, I got to grow where I was planted. And I had a wonderful time in West Virginia. Like, I will fight you if you talk bad about West Virginia. And I met some people who were really lovely. So what I tell young people is really grow where you're planted, right, and give people a chance to surprise you, and really focus on the thing that you want to see happen. There's an old proverb that says, he who looks for goodwill will find it. And the one who looks for, what's the rest of that proverb? Like bad stuff, it'll come to you, right? And I think that's true. That's been a help in my life to persist that way. And that's what I generally recommend. But it also makes you think about something else from the documentary. And that's hair, because they did talk about, you were going with hair. Great. So we did talk about that, that we have noted that that's a really good, important topic. So with hair, I want to address that idea about being the only one. And African-American women, we are, there are documentaries about us and our hair. And it has historically been very politicized. And I think one thing many women are doing in this modern moment, in this contemporary moment, is aiming to let it just be whatever they want it to be. So I'm rocking my distressed fro right now, my twist out, because I wanted to today. And it doesn't have to mean so much. Or it could mean a whole lot if I said so. Like, that's the moment that I'm privileged to be in, but the women who came before me, who would certainly not have my job and have the way I wear my hair, and I change it a lot. Right. So since they went through that, I'm in a space where it doesn't have to be as politicized for me, where I can get hired. And there are people who do still encounter discrimination because of how they want to wear their hair. That is a real situation. But it is better than it has been in the years prior. And so we're in a space where we get to do a lot of styles that express us having liberty and not making it have to mean as much as it has had to mean historically. And just what the show was a moment in time when people were also coming into an appreciation of African heritage and saying, not only is it okay that we were Black, actually that we are Black, but we're proud of that. We want to celebrate that and own and honor it. And what civil rights movement veterans often tell me to tell students is that the Black consciousness movement was also about trying to get rid of the psychological trauma of slavery and desegregation, the things that said Blackness is lowly and is bad and is ugly, right? So for us to be able to say Black is beautiful is not to say we hate white people, but rather we're going to embrace how we're made, celebrate how we're created, and honor it, although it has been historically degraded. We're going to just do that for ourselves. And they often say that that's something that white Americans should engage too, because it's actually toxic for white people or anybody else to decide that they're more beautiful or they are the best.
I'm going to piggyback off of that with a question, and not that I'm not necessarily wanting you to comment on any of the, whether you answer how you want to answer, but in that context, is that the same kind of the undertone of the Black Lives Matter movement? It's not a matter of saying where the Black lives are the only lives that matter, right? As you were talking about it, is that kind of the same flavor now? Regardless of the undertones of what we agree or disagree with, just that phrase alone.
I think that's what that is aiming to say. Like, listen, we can see these records of disproportionate treatment, and just the lack of diverse imagery has meant that African Americans have not had the background psychological support to be viewed as fully human or fully complex. So then that can justify their mistreatment. If you only see these images of negative images, it says that people are this, and then they're a bad people, maybe even at the core. So the Black Lives Matter general initiative, the part that you're talking about, I think the idea,
right,
despite all how you might look at the problems within the organization itself or how people have co-opted or used it, the concept generally is, hey, pay attention to a people who have been historically marginalized is not as valuable as another group. Actually, consider if this were your child, if these things were happening to redhead Catholics, would you feel the same way if there was an overabundance of the imagery of white Jewish businessmen being abused the way that you've seen Black boys on the street? Would you feel the same way, right? So that's what I think it is.
Right. Mr. Mark, I'm glad you're back with us. We didn't lose you for too long.
No.
We're ending towards the end. We've got about 5 minutes here. Okay. So I do want to give each one of you some ending comments to answer or say whatever you want to say to finish up. Or I can ask. I've got tons of questions. We can keep talking. We can keep talking. But I'm respecting the time. I was aiming to end at 8, so we've got about 5 minutes left. So I do want you guys to comment, give you a chance to say whatever you want to say, and then if there's a few more minutes left, I can add another question. So we'll start with you, Mr. Mark.
Okay. Again, as we're about to close, I apologize we're having all kind of problems out here in my neighborhood with the trees down and everything. And I've been walking all over the house today. I've been in 2 meetings like this today, and both things have happened. So I've walked all over the place, and it's been crazy. But let me thank you, one, for having me, and Dr. Krystal being with her. I mean, you guys are superstars in my mind. So I appreciate what you do, and keep marching forward and helping these students.
Thank you.
I bleed purple and gold. So I love Tennessee Tech University. It's been good for me. My wife's a graduate. My daughter's a graduate. I've had up to 7 or 8, 9. In fact, I have a great niece at Tennessee Tech, a freshman now, in the education department. So it's been a wonderful place. One of the things that typically will happen is somebody will say, how do you, you're at that school that is predominantly white, and, how'd you, as Dr. Krystal said, how do you navigate that? As if it was a minefield. I said, well, don't treat it like it's a minefield until it's a minefield. Don't make an assumption before you go in. Most of the people at Tennessee Tech were wonderful for me, and very quickly I learned the ones that were not, and what their problems were. I would ask. I probably saw as much discrimination as an athlete, and hearing that athletes are jocks, the term jocks. which implied that I should not be as bright as the normal population should be. So, so I heard those things, and also being an English journalism major, I was really not expected to be that. That was the most troubling thing, rather than race. I mean, it was just, you're an athlete, so you're not supposed to be that bright, kind of a thing. So, and so again, you just wade through these things. And looking at African American students, I'm saying to them, if anybody's watching, the world is what it is, and it's on. You can't change everybody else. You can change you. And don't allow the world to change you from something that your parents would have you be relative to being successful and being the person you're supposed to be. And I think Dr. Krystal elaborated on that very well. Be who you're supposed to be. Be proud of who you are and where you come from, and move forward. And if someone asks or has questions or talks down to you or whatever it may be, whatever the situation may be, wade right into that. Tell them who you are and where you belong in this society. We belong. I tell people all the time, I said, I'm an American. I was born in these United States of America. I belong. Yeah, I belong. I am here, and I'm not going anywhere. And I will help anybody who needs my assistance, who needs my help. I don't care. I don't have a hang up about that. But I think our country right now has a few hang ups about some things. And I think people are going to have to speak. I tell people, I tell my congregation that as Christians, not saying anything. If you know something's wrong, if you don't say anything, that's an answer.
Right.
Yes, sir.
An answer. If something's wrong, what's right and what's wrong. Sometimes you got to choose the hard right, not the easy wrong. And we're faced with those dilemmas today. And you guys are going to face those things, and you're going to be standing up, and you're going to be out front, and you tell people what's right. Well, change. I had a good friend who said, sometimes we move in all that we know. I think that has applied to a lot of people over the last couple of decades, but now we have the opportunity to move outside of all that we know,
right,
into a more current and a world that's more compassionate, not as fearful of change and those things. We've got to change. The world is about change.
Right.
Getting better entails change. It as educators. Being better, being more understood, being more compassionate, being more learned comes with change. You can't sit in that box. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to tell people, get out of that box. Get out of that thinking that's 2 decades old, or that mindset that you're doing this only because somebody told you that this was the way it was. Be able to think. God gave us all individual minds. Be able to think for yourself. What's right? What's wrong?
Amen.
I'm off the preaching thing.
You're good. Well, I'll let Dr. Krystal say a few words because I know she has to go, and if we have a few minutes, I'll let you come back to you, Mr. Mark. Go ahead, Dr. Krystal.
So for a final comment, thinking about the fact that this documentary is really about using imagery to advance change and to try to address some serious problems in society, I think on the individual level, we can continue the kind of work that Ellis Haizlip started by actually making ourselves the best selves that we can be. So people maybe have not seen a 5'10" professor who is African-American with an afro walk into their class before. But as they deal with my reality all semester, that becomes real to them, right? So be whoever it is you need to be, handling your own business, and you do help then to push back against bad things with true imagery.
Amen.
So thanks for having me. It was nice to be here.
Dr.
You all
here. Good to see you.
You too.
Thank you for joining us.
You fit right in the film with all the other sisters.
I tried.
Thank you, Dr.
All right.
Krystal. We'll let you go. I know you have to go. I'll wrap it up with Mark Burnett. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Mr. Mark, for also coming. I know you've got a lot to say, and we will have to have a separate conversation where we can talk for at least an hour on this thing, on these things, because we can probably keep going. I do want to say a special thank you, not just for coming on, but for truly paving the way for a lot of us younger people at Tennessee Tech, at a predominantly white institution, or just for being just the person you are. You have that same reputation with Black people as with white people, which means it goes to the heart of what you said of being an example and helping people because they're people, and
That's
they
right.
need help.
We're just people.
Yes, and
And
so
so, being inclusive of everyone is the goal. I mean, just be inclusive.
right.
Get to know someone. Get to know someone that's not like you. How about that?
Yes.
I
And
mean,
I just want to say thank you for that, because
well,
when I came, you were already here. So I was a freshman in the dorms, and I had a few meetings where you were the speaker. And over the years, I've stuck around, and I can always come to your office and ask you for advice. And I worked for a short period at the Multicultural Center, and you were, the head of that over Dr. Rob Owen. So we spent a lot of time together at that time as well. So just want to thank you for being a role model in our society. And you are a pastor right now, and I think it's a predominantly white church.
it is.
So
And that's fine. I'm
that
good
is
with
fine.
Yeah.
That is fine. So I just want to say thank you so much for all you've done for our community and continue to do. And it's so good to have you on, and hopefully we can schedule something whether to talk about this some more, or just talk about painting.
That's right. We need to do that. We really need to do that.
We could talk about
and let
painting.
me say thank you for having me. You're moving forward. Don't stop.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. You have a wonderful night, and I want to thank our audience for joining us today. Remember, it is your donation to WCTE that makes these programs like this very possible, and things like Live at 5, one-on-one with Becky, and all the things we do and the things that we do in our community. So thank you very much, and have a
All right.
night.
God bless you.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.